Thanks for kind words, and thanks really for hosting me for the second time in 2 years. It's a great pleasure to be at Politecnico, and this is not just words. We started Keio University very much on the initiative of the representative of Politecnico Di Milano for the Far East, Professor Marco Imperadori, and my initiative. We started collaboration between two universities, which is becoming very, very rich, and that is parallel to this initiative, which started with my contacts with Dasto, with Gabriele Pasqui and colleagues a couple of years ago at the actually 150th anniversary of Politecnico di Milano. So in a way, strange to say, but I feel at home. Day before yesterday, when I started my course in Contemporary City, I felt really strange to say welcome to students of Politecnico to their own university. It is my course at Politecnico. I feel a little bit better today when I realize that very few of them are Italians. Politecnico is now so cross-cultural, so intercultural, so rich that I really enjoy, and I don't know, this visit gives me some energy, and I haven't seen any of Milano yet because I'm preparing my PowerPoints for presentations passionately. All except this one. You will see, this one is messy. But I have to speak about my laboratory, the co+labo way of search of spatial quality. And the laboratory is designed to be messy. So that messiness in this presentation is partly engineered, and partly it always happens to us. Maybe because the emphasis is on cities, and in cities the messiness is part of its beauty, part of predictability. So I hope that this lecture is not going to be too messy, but I hope that it will open some questions. First, maybe a couple of words of introduction. Bertrando introduced me as a globetrotter. Yes, I mean, that is a kind of a difficult thing. Usually people start with a normal question, where are you from? And that is, opener, if you don't know what to ask, somebody says, oh, where are you from? And that one says like this, and then conversation starts. When people ask me, where am I from? Like, do you have time? Should I start from geography or from history? Because originally I'm from vicinity of Italy. I'm from what used to be Yugoslavia, so I'm from the past. I can really give some geographic coordinates, but also, anything more than that is past. More than 25 years ago, I moved to Australia. So I lived and taught at the University of Melbourne for many years. And then I started exploring Southeast Asian urbanities before getting to Tokyo, to Japan, which was always my fascination. So that is a kind of an introduction which is very personal, but the laboratories are also a very personal venture. So Keio University is the oldest university in Japan. It is a venerable institution established in 1960. Do you know, 1960? Suzuki-san doesn't know, so students should know. I think 1965, 1966, something like that. It is Japanese educational system is very peculiar. It's very interesting, different, I dare say, like everything else there, from what practices in other parts of the world. The most important, the most distinguishing feature of Japanese educational system are laboratories, research laboratories called kenkyōshitsu. And the difference is in an almost total autonomy of those small units of educational system. So students, for instance, in the Faculty of Science and Technology, where in my case architecture is housed, very typical for Japan, where the technological way of thinking dominates, very much thinking about built environments. Students take generic degree first 3 years, and then during their third year of those broad generic interdisciplinary studies, they start to think about vocational orientation. And then from fourth year, or final year of undergraduate studies, they undertake in the laboratory of their choosing. And they continue their master's degree there. So students come to laboratory and to spend 3 years there. Some can continue, of course, PhD. So research laboratories are final year of undergraduate program, which is about producing a research thesis, not design but research thesis, and 2 years of master's thesis, and PhD and other participants. I'm mentioning that just to indicate to you that laboratories are very interesting in the sense that they are schools within the school, and laboratories are to an incredible level autarkic. So the level of responsibility of the teacher is enormous. I have never felt such level of responsibility teaching, because a number of students who come to my laboratory very much depend on my responsibility or irresponsibility. So the feeling of responsibility, I think, is heightened by that vulnerable youth, which comes with full trust into what the teacher is there to say. So that is, I think, important to know before we start doing this, because each laboratory, having a professor at its helm, has its own way. I mean, we can mystify it. Greeks say method, and Chinese say Dao or Tao. Everything sounds very, very deep and spiritual, but it is just about the way of doing things. And in my case, the way how I conceive the laboratory is established on the basis of my practice, which started in Europe, where I was working in former Yugoslavia, UK, and for a very short but beautiful period in Vicenza in Italy. And then moving to Australia, working there, starting to work in Southeast Asia, before eventually coming to Japan. So there is a way which is very empirical. I don't know about other colleagues, professors here in the audience, but in principle, I don't know if I ever thought about teaching. It happened to me. And nobody teaches us how to teach. So we don't go through some studies of pedagogy. We all find our way somehow in that world of teaching. And for me, the most interesting experience was my previous life, when I was practicing some sport, and then after that, coaching. And my best lessons for teaching came actually from that experience, from the knowledge that one whom you are coaching may be more talented, may be better, but definitely is different from me. So to clone people to be like me is the least likely successful scenario. So trying to listen who those people are, or who they want to be, and trying to help on that way, and even help if there is a dilemma that is not the right way, is something that I like. I don't know how successful I can be in that, but that is something that I would like to bring to you through this presentation, which is subtitled, but I see that I have this subtitle, Smorgasbord. So the idea is that this is really like a huge table, and I will present to you some basic introduction, and then give an introduction of just a couple of projects at 2 different ends in terms of scales. And then if there is any discussion, especially because the audience is relatively small, we can enter discussion, and we can continue this if necessary. So then let me start. I was thinking first to do something inexcusable for the Faculty of Architecture and all that, to maybe just be like proper Fidel Castro and just talk, but without images. But you know, it is kind of sacrilegious to not to show images when we speak about architecture and cities. So I couldn't do that to you. So this is that theory and practice of urbanity that I'm delivering as a subject within Contemporary Cities program at Politecnico under Bertrando's supervision and guidance. This is my stamp. In Japan, stamp, hanko, is very important. So we made this stamp, which has my personal story a little bit in it. And theory and practice of urbanity, where work is going to be verified by my own Japanese flavor of my life there. I wanted, these are first several slides are actually coming from this course on contemporary city, where I decided by quoting Roland Barthes, who said some things better than I can. In his book, The Preparation of the Novel, which was not designed to be, it was really a course where he was talking to students about possible writing of a book that he was about to undertake, or that he was thinking to undertake. And this, what I'm teaching now at Politecnico, is really very much about me finishing a manuscript for something that I think is long overdue. He wrote, and he said, as you can see here, I sincerely believe that the origin of teaching such as this must always locate a fantasy, which can vary from year to year, because our teaching has certain rhythm. But importance of that fantasy. And he says, no, Sisyphus is not a happy guy. He's an alienated, not by the futility of his work, but by its repetition. So for me, when I was thinking about this project at Polimi, and these notes are, this margin is actually for the notes which come from my notebook when I started preparing for this. Why delivered in an unusual format? I wanted to deliver it in an unusual format, and you see that my PowerPoint is a kind of unusual format. I wanted to have a PowerPoint with two margins on the side, so that there is a main body and there are distractions and digressions on the sides. So I want you, in this case, my students in that course, to think critically, to think creatively, to think beyond routine. Because as again Barth says, this daily grind must be interrupted. So my note on the 16th of July when I was doing this, a new way of preparation and delivery of the course. New talking as writing, because it is, I want to write. As design, because I'm an architect, I'm an urban designer, my brain works like that. As thinking, of course, but also very important as being with help of Jean-Luc Nancy, students to be themselves in my course. So that is something that I like to do in my laboratory. In Japan, when I came to Keio University, honored. It was after 2 years at the University of Tokyo when I returned back to Melbourne, which was an excellent place for learning about academic to really expand horizons. I was offered this job, and I promised to my colleagues solemnly, and my students know here, that I will never learn Japanese language. Oops. Professor who is illiterate, can't read. That was a recognition really of my respect for that language and that culture, because I was just telling some colleagues and students sitting with them, I know that I would never be able to read a book which I want to read in that language. So it is better to be honest upfront. But I learn about Japanese language, and I learn about Japanese culture. That culture can never become my culture, but I can learn about it. That language can never become my language, but I can learn about it. So that is why. So co+labo is based on that. It is based on one of several Keio campuses. This is Hiyoshi campus and this beautiful ginkgo tree alley which leads to our Yagami campus, which I jokingly call Acropolis, because it is on the hill, except beauty is missing, but everything else topographically is there. The chance was there. And this is that hanko of mine, that name, which a friend of mine, Kodama Yuichiro, my oldest Japanese friend, wrote to me when I first time visited Japan. He told me that he will make my hanko, that almighty stamp which replaces your signature. And a few days later I asked him, Yuichiro, what's happening with my hanko? He says, Darko, I have to get to know you better. Because the way how the name is written is not alphabetic, of course. It is associated with certain meaning. And Chinese and Japanese in the audience can decipher that, what we alphabetic people cannot in this. So laboratory is about architecture and urban design. It is about research, design research, and action, which is very, very important for us. And on the website and the blog is, I quoted Henri Lefebvre and his book Towards an Architecture of Enjoyment, which is poor translation of vers on Archilecture de Jouissance, where he says that something about this plus, the dignity of bearing the plus sign, that of joy, happiness, enjoyment, and sensuality, the sign of life. So the name co+labo is actually my lifeline there. In order to live without speaking the language, without knowing the language, feeling my ways, I fundamentally depend on colleagues and friends. I depend on those who collaborate with me. And I'm very glad to have several friends, several colleagues who are like bouncing boards for my ideas and my misconceptions, with whom I discuss things. So that brings together in a single sentence many of the keywords which define the aims of my laboratory. My son, who is also an architect, added this red color, which is also important, the color of life. And for us, throughout the Lefebvre's theory of space, architectural practices are to be conceptualized as transversal. That to say, cutting across ontological categories, this is a typing error, and contributing to all phases of research, programming, designing, construction, and the continuous appropriation of buildings. And that is preposterous, that is huge. But I think if one thinks in terms of, as Bertrand said in introduction, environmental and cultural sustainability, we have to be Lefebvrean to large degree, and to say that we have to think about totality, that we have to think about the whole thing. Our scales are very much about taming the knowledge, about trying to establish our expertise, like that stamp of relevance, of our own relevance, while space, lives, people's lives for which we are designing refuse to be tamed in that sense. So that is that fantasy that Roland Barthes was speaking in the beginning. There has to be a utopia. And we know that we will never get there. But the way is about going there. That is that method which is about getting to the place where probably most likely we can never get, but we know that going towards and going in that direction is worth spending life. So laboratory, this is just a snapshot of some of the activities from the last year. And I will just go through some of those before coming to those two projects which I want to show. We collaborate with Gale Architects from Copenhagen, which is a kind of still frustrating. Last several years, it is in the formative stages, because Gales are very, very strong established practice. But I'm with them what they call expert for contextualization, which sounds ridiculous unless you really know what it means. It is about trying to find a way how to transfer the level of excellence of, say, Danish urban design into Japanese space. This opens now a Pandora's box of discussion. Let me just mention it as one of digressions, because many of you, and I know many of you in the audience, know that that is my kind of reason for staying and fascination with being in Japan. It took me years to realize that in Japanese language there is no term equivalent for the Western term public. There isn't. And when you tell that to an architect urbanist, that foundation stone is not there, the whole building starts to crumble. You either admit that something with you is wrong, because it can't be wrong with that culture, with those cultures of East and Far East. And of course, my explanation can be reduced to the joke, but 500 years BC, when some Greeks were having a chat in Agora and speaking about public and koinonia and all those noble things which generated what we appreciate when we live open space, on the other side of the globe, there was some guy whose name was Confucius, and they were discussing completely different things, also wanting the better and brighter and more beautiful world, and they were thinking about different kind of order. Greeks had no idea about Confucius, of course, and he had no idea about them. So it was absolutely not natural that the whole world would at the same moment or at all come to the same concepts. But we in proverbial West tend to believe that our concepts are global, so if somebody doesn't like them, we impose them. So I'm discovering enjoyment in being lost, I think in a very interesting way, in the world which is based on different concepts, of different fundamental concepts. Then collaboration with Eureka, young architectural practice secretary and now a new PhD student in my laboratory who is with us for 8 years, a very nice practicing architect, Sano Satoshi, runs this practice and makes buildings which are of a very interesting new kind for Tokyo, buildings which are activators of public space, buildings which generously give, where private generously gives something to, let's call it public. We can speak about that absence of public later if you want. Then Sana, today we had Sejima Kazuyo here as a secret guest of my theory and practice of urbanity. And this is one of the workshops in which my students took part recently on Inujima. So learning by doing, that is very interesting and very important feature of Japanese approach to architecture, which is about making things, monozukuri, rather more than theorizing. And then last year, for instance, when two of students from Politecnico di Milano, Enrico and Niccolo, were our guests, we had a project for imaginary Keio Graduate School of Design, which we want to make and which we are going to make. And I invited Maki Fumihiko, who is this fantastic figure, 88 years old architect, who was introduced to me when I started studying architecture as an excellent middle-aged architect. And now I'm approaching quite old age, and Fumihiko Maki is still young, which is incredible, and his amazing opus. And then working abroad. So this is on the island of Vis in Croatia. For last 5 years we had workshops. So this is my friend Boško here doing the anatomy, that is his name of our workshop, Anatomy of the Island, where we are trying to find solutions, or trying to find ideas rather than solutions, for islands, for cultures, for microcultures that Adriatic is so abound and Mediterranean is so rich of, which do not want to follow the way towards being consumed and discarded by tourism. So this is a snapshot from one of our workshops there, where a very interesting way of thinking unfolds by participation of my laboratory, Kengo Kuma's laboratory, since last year Politecnico di Milano, Graz, Paris, Val de Seine, and several other universities. So this was and yes, and then Politecnico di Milano, of course. As I said in the beginning, Antonella Colistra was our first exchange student who was fantastic spirit, literally. She brought Mediterranean sun into my laboratory there. And this was from departure, this was from farewell to Antonella. And one of my students was unable to be there. So he sent his photos and others were joking and they put him as a ghost here. You can see that he's a little bit transparent, my Sato-san, but he wanted to be there at least as a ghost. And then last September, here are Enrico and Nicolo and Suzuki-san who are here. Presenting their thesis, which is about to be defended at Politecnico. So, and this is Magome-san. So Aki-san, Suzuki, and Magome-san are two of first my double degree students who came to Politecnico to do double degree with this university. So this is that. This is us in Navigli a few nights ago. So this is that cross section of those many activities, and this plus signifies many and too many. That is that Lefebvrean jouissance. I was just telling these students, that is what comes on the top of everything. So when you have everything, it is possible to have more. And that more brings potential of some quality which is beyond. And that is what Lefebvre famously called jouissance. So these are just some works which have just been defended by my research students. This is master student, ambiguity of ownership, appropriation of particular very interesting landmark project in late 1960s, early 1970s in Tokyo, where he was doing spatial, architectural, and urban analysis, blending scales, and spaces and behavior of people in small complex houses by Tsuji Soyoka-san, which is about that in-between space, which, for instance, that piece of architecture by Sano-san shows, where she was exploring exemplary examples from Japanese architecture over the last 10 years, and how these in-between spaces, which by many characterize the essence and the difference between Japanese space and Western space, which they explain, as she would say, why Noli map doesn't work in Tokyo. That kind of ambiguous space which is neither nor. And then the potential for urban agriculture in high-density urban areas by another of my master students, which is a fascinating field. His case study was in Ginza. Ginza is one of the densiest parts of Tokyo, one of the densiest parts in the world, one of the most expensive pieces of land in the world, and there is a very rich, thriving urban agriculture there, sometimes outdoors at the top of those high buildings, sometimes indoors. So he was exploring the potential of agriculture there, and he was exploring also how to contribute to an already established network of opportunities, a kind of ecosystem of that agriculture, not only in ecological terms, but in social terms. These producers have associated exhibition spaces, shops, so the whole consumption cycle is as much as possible located in Ginza itself. And again, we are not speaking about any place. We are speaking about a space which was famously during that big bubble in Japan. The land of Ginza was more expensive than whole New York. So that was famous bubble. So, and then another, this is now undergraduate students, but I don't distinguish students by the level of studies. I distinguish students by the level of achievement. So sometimes undergraduate students achieve far better results than master students. And it is easy to acknowledge that. Some people are just excellent, some people are only good. So, and I think at Keio we have at least good students. The impact of privately owned public space in urban forms and practices. The Tokyo Olympics are coming as a big elephant into the glass door to Tokyo. And POPs is popping up everywhere. American practices are being absorbed without any cushion. So Onishi-san, one of my students, new master students, this was his undergraduate thesis, did this work exploring all existing example of POPs, which is in that most expensive land in probably still, maybe, I don't know, in the world. And Daisuke Kobayashi also exploring, for instance, Shinto shrines in Ginza. So that expensive land has a number of Shinto shrines. But because land becomes so expensive, very often those shrines get either minimized spatially and put in some corner, or they get elevated to the top of the high-rise building. But they have to satisfy certain rules. So he was exploring the ideal Shinto shrine, because in order for some building to perform as a Shinto shrine, it has to be certified by Shinto organization, and exploring, for instance, what they do to bring a little bit of soil all the way to the top floor, because that is one of the conditions. Open sky, greenery, and touch the soil. So fascinating. For me as a foreigner, fascinating story. And one of the reasons why I'm in Tokyo is my selfishness. I learn. So all the way to very, very architectural and very formal thesis by one of undergraduates, also the relationship between the shapes and spaces of human emotions, curved walls and perception of spatial quality. Yuki Takasu-san is bringing in what we are doing for several years now with one research laboratory by Mitsukura, Professor Mitsukura, who is making very sensitive EEG, electroencephalographs, who are detecting, who are capturing our emotional responses to space, and trying to see what is the difference between what people say their feeling is when they go through transitions of spaces of this kind, and what their brain says that emotion is about. So it is a beginning of the work which she will continue into masters over the next 2 years, and gives a very, very special contribution to that, as I say, ongoing research, which until now we were trying to conduct at urban scales, but now it goes into confinement of very, very narrowly focused, but deliberately narrowly focused space, which excludes a number of our senses which we are unable to exclude, of course. And these same undergraduate students were very successful last year. At our internal competition in top 6, 5 of them were in the top 6 in the faculty. And now they got some awards. I don't know if you know about this. These are 2 students. In Japan, there is a very strong culture of architectural competitions. It took me some time to understand that, because my students were never telling me that they are taking part in those competitions. Sometimes they are very small. Sometimes it is just an A4 submission requirement. It is about an idea. And that is one of the reasons why architectural culture flourishes in Japan so much. It is about collaboration, which is part of culture where senior students are always helping junior students, but at the same time competitiveness. So these are Onishi-san and Yamashita-san who have qualified the highest, but all 6 of them have got various awards at those competitions. So I must say, very, very proud professor there. So this year. So this is that kind of cross-section through doing too much. And now a little bit of structuring about it. So urban research, and when I say urban research, this doesn't mean urbanism. It is about urban condition, which includes urban scales, architectural scales, human lives in it. That is how I like to see it. And the project measuring the non-measurable. Project measuring the non-measurable unfolded for 3 years in my laboratory, or it was organized by my laboratory. I have received funding from the Japanese government for the project, which was to unfold between 2011 and finished in 2014, and it continues in its results to live in and around laboratory. As you can imagine, the title had a tongue-in-cheek there. For me, it was about measuring the non-measurable, trying to tell all those engineers and scientists in the faculty that I believe that they will never be able to measure what really matters. But for them, it was non-measurable. It was really just a matter of time when everything, all our lives are going to be subjected to things like this and to EEGs, like maybe you can see it somewhere on this photo on the face, on the head of this beautiful lady. So it was really about entering into that kind of dialectics between innovation and tradition, science and art, techne and poesis, which we have managed to separate. In Greece, techne and poesis were never separated. They kind of lived very much in the way that this wise Eastern symbol of yin and yang shows. In technical, there is, and they can be poetic, and in poetic there can be technical. It is almost impossible to separate. We are managing in our binary system to say what some popular poets in recent years were saying, you are either us, or with us or against us. So again, laboratory focusing on totality, complexity shamelessly, because that is what reality is about. And when we produce architecture and when we produce urban spaces, we are entering that game regardless what we want. So it is urbanism and architecture, experience, existence, body, chiasma. As Michel Serres says, 5 senses or more. So when an expert in senses like Michel Serres says 5 or more, I can only believe. It is about quality of space, urban, public, private, but across cultures. And that is what is that globetrotterism or nomadism or homelessness of mine all about. Because I learned to enjoy cultures in which I'm illiterate, where Roland Barthes says you live in the murmur of unrecognizable voices. It is interesting. It provides some kind of cushion, as he says, against primitivism. You cannot label people in the street by their accent, which I became too sensitive to when that what used to be my country started falling apart. Then I went to Australia when I was still able to decipher some of that. But then in Japan, I opened some other senses. So I have to rely on these 5 or more in order to orientate myself there. So now back to co+labo. For this, at the end of the school year, my students sent me this. My photo, which was all pixelated in very many activities that we are doing. And it's really good because that is a kind of this what I'm trying to communicate to you. Who am I for them? I'm one of those who kind of messes their lives by dragging them into these situations in Japan and elsewhere and all that. Something went wrong with this. Good. I thought there was some problem with PowerPoint today. So I kind of decided just for these 2 presentations, the day before yesterday and today, to add a little bit of color in this. And these are kind of what I bring to that laboratory. I believe that spaces shape us as much as we shape spaces. I'm not the first one, of course, who said that. So this is a place where I was born. I was very much shaped by that space, all the way since I was born on the 28th of August, so it must have been at least 35 degrees in shade. All the way to the destruction of this bridge. And the name of the city is Mostar. It was in former Yugoslavia in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And most in my language means bridge. So when the city that has a name, bridge, in it, that the name of the city has a bridge in it, and then that bridge gets destroyed, that is a tragedy which is difficult to imagine. Then Split on Adriatic coast, and Belgrade, where I lived and loved, and then London, where I spent important part of my professional life, and then Vicenza, whom I cannot miss because we can speak about that. And then Melbourne, really important to me. A brief encounter with Bangkok, but in the most positive sense, damage for life. And then now Tokyo, what I'm masochistically enjoying since 2007 with a short interruption. So the cities shape us, and it is, I think, important, and I'm showing this to you because I like to show this to my students, to say I'm showing to you what shapes me, and please think what shapes you. And it is about that, establishing that relationship, hopefully, with them. And of course, there are some faces. The list can be longer or shorter. This list is more or less for this, what I'm doing at Politecnico now. People upon whose ideas I draw, people whom I will quote or forget to quote. And then places where I used to work. Currently, I'm at Keio and associated with United Nations University. The best place I ever worked was this first one, Center for Planning of Urban Development. And then all of them left their mark. So this is very important in terms of dealing with this madness of plus, to be able to set up your coordinates, because I cannot be everything. I cannot be everywhere, of course. I cannot be expert in everything. I do believe that my expertise in some aspects is there, but to be able to position that means to be able to be aware of totality, I believe. And that is important. And these are those books, that some of which Bertrando mentioned in the beginning. So what do? Cities and architecture, and I like to repeat this dumb diagram because I believe it communicates to a certain degree the essence of what we were exploring in Eminem. I was joking, it's like, that's different Eminem, not that rapper, But so this, a building and that space, inside, outside, and this in between. So this tends to be public, private, public, but it can be private, open, void, building, solid, private, but it can be public, it can be POPs. But this in-between space, which is all about relationships and interactions, that is the space of encounter, difference, desire. And that is where very much, if you want me to focus, that is where all this project of my students that I was showing to you are kind of converging in various scales to various degrees, but that is a convergence point, desire. And I always love to show this. And this was one of the abused images in Eminem workshop. But isn't it exactly like electrical or like magnetic field? Where the whole miracle is happening is not where the finger of the weak or the finger of the strong are. The whole miracle is in that space in between, in that void. So as we can track our behavior and our proximities now easily with GPS and all other things, this is about magnetics and electrical fields. So this is where architecture and urbanity, where city can happen, but there is just a promise. It is impossible to have certain certainty about that. And that is where urbanity, or in Japanese would be toshisei, cityness, happen. So that, and then of course we start complicating, and this is just of course continuing the banal, simple exercise, but it is about vector becoming two-dimensional, three-dimensional, space-time, and then multisensoriality comes in and experience chiasma of Merleau-Ponty. And this is one of the streets in Tokyo which we are exploring. Maybe later we can mention that, where bioclimatic conditions are happening along with social conditions. So eye, touch, hearing, smell, taste. All is there. All is there. We tend to privilege eye. I believe in each language say, oh, it looks good. But in the end, it matters how it smells, how it tastes, and all that. So spheres of responsibility. And that is what is important for me. There is environmental and ecological and social and cultural sphere. And that is what is very important. So in 2008, when I was interviewed for Keio, at the faculty at System Design Engineering department, architecture was very much marginal, with urban design really hovering out. I was mentioning to my students today, it is very characteristic in Japan that it has fantastic object design, product design, interior design, architectural design, and then urban engineering. There is no urban design studies as such. And urban planning tends to be American style, but when there is no concept of public, you cannot expect really much of the planning except as facilitation of economic processes. So this is what we started to do, trying to push in this direction to embrace cultural, philosophical, social, environmental, as it says here. So from 2009, this was the effort. And ethics is the key word there. Together with Sejima Kazuya and Kobayashi Hirota-san, two colleagues from Sejima-san was then at Keio with us actively, we established IKI, International Keio Institute for Architecture and Urbanism. And that is where ethics, critical thinking came in, because I believe that should be a thinking of 21st century. As you see, I like to joke and I like to be a little bit cynical, so I say, I believe that this is not 21st century. I believe that 21st century should be about something else, not what is happening globally now. So ethics, and because this is happening in the Faculty of Science and Technology, I keep on repeating, have to be aware of that. So I like to show this to my students, and I say, this is a group of excellent engineers. Fantastic. They were working in Los Alamos in Manhattan Project, and they produced their baby. Fantastic piece of technology. And it worked very well. But would you join that team? Would you join the team of engineers which would make even better bomb? So there is something that we call ethics. And we do that the same thing in architecture, placing these sort of typologies which are so dependent on energy which comes from outside is a crime against environment. So draw the line, not in sand. Draw the line and say, I do not want to cross that line as a professional architect or urbanist. So This DR is not me. This is design research now. So this was about research and some parts of research. By the way, sorry, I forgot, but let me not make that digression. I forgot to mention, or I will make that because they deserve it, that digression towards PhD program. Because laboratory is now getting to what I wanted to do for a long time. So this is thanks to our blog, thanks to Edurom. I can do this. Just to briefly tell you, but it's a bit slow. So this is Sano-san. Alice Kovata is postdoctoral fellow. I was very proud when she, after spending almost a year as a visiting PhD student from Udine and Venice in my laboratory, when she completed, she came back to do her postdoctoral fellowship, which is about very, very interesting aspects of space in Tokyo, about playfulness, about play, fun, and what we could call public space. Another Italian, Marco Capitanio, he's from Como actually, but he studied in Switzerland, in Netherlands, in Shanghai before settling in Tokyo and getting married there. He's doing very interesting research about Japanese practice of machizukuri, which means town making, which is very much bottom-up compensation for that weak planning that is official. Ivan Filipovic, from what used to be for me, what used to be Yugoslavia, from Belgrade. He is doing PhD, started doing PhD about extreme closed projects, extreme panic exclusion of outdoor space, which is embassy design in these times. He, as a practicing architect, was involved in embassy design, and now he's making that his research project. My son, Satoshi-san, is doing PhD, which is really about what he discovered in his practical work, about that generosity of architecture, ability of architecture to create interaction. And Ana Medina is just about, she has just finished her PhD, as I said, in Madrid, and she is now going to join us as a postdoctoral fellow. Amano-san, Miyatake-san, Tsuji-san, others, these are Masters 2 students, Aki-san here, and let me not now go, but really remarkably young people. And laboratory, because it is compact, it is small, it is small enough and big enough, provides fantastic environment where we know each other. And that's the beauty of the laboratory. Smallness, but also potentially for if somebody doesn't really fit into laboratory, it can be a terrible, terrible burden or life sentence. So this design research is critically marked by this, what I called radical realism. Because in one of these books, which was important to me at the date when I had that kind of luxury of editing it, is implementation, praxis of eco-urbanity. As the name suggests, eco-urbanity is really about trying to get rid of a prejudice which says how cities necessarily consume and destroy environment and perpetuate that dogma that out there is beautiful and untouched wilderness and nature, and we live in our barbaric environments that we create. It doesn't have to be so. As Lefebvre said, cities are spatial projection of society. So if our societies are able to live a sustainable way, if our politics is about sustainable development, then we are able to produce sustainable environment. But if our societies and our politics are unable to do that, well, then yes, we create monsters. So radical realism is radical in the sense that what is realistic to ask today is radical compared to what we really do. So this was a project which we did a couple of years ago for Many Birong, real project in Australia, which was about for Vic Urban local planning agency. When I was living in Melbourne, I told my friends there, if you have politically hot potatoes, please ask us to do. If we do it well, you can say, oh, we collaborate with Keio University. But if you don't like, or if politicians don't like the project, you can just say, oh, Darko and his students, you know. So, but this one went well. And so it was about this site, triangular site here enclosed by this river, which since Australia was established, which means since Western occupations, Aborigines would say, of Australia, was a military site. So it was a black hole. Nobody knew what was happening there, except people knew that it is about explosives, testing explosives. But beautiful place. An army has left that. It became public land. And we were asked to push this radical agenda because that is what colleagues in Melbourne couldn't do for obvious political reasons and all that. But, you know, this kind of outcast in Tokyo, he could try. So we proclaimed that living responsibly, it means living 21st century. And we were thinking how to advise about the lifestyle which would be about sustainable Meribirong. The name of the place is Meribirong, an Aboriginal word. So it was about cultivating new culture of Melbourne, using that awareness that word culture is younger than agriculture. First, we started cultivating land. And once when we settled, because we started cultivating land, we started to cultivate ourselves as well. So it was something about that. It was about imagining a radically different urbanity which is possible, productive landscapes. And this was my joke, that by 2030 I would like Lonely Planet guide next to some really interesting streets in Melbourne to have the streets of Meribirong. So I will skip very fast through this, but it was 2030 agenda, and the concept was based on the total resource approach. Uncompromising resource approach where all resources, topography and water, climatic resources, stocks and inheritances, meaning all buildings that are currently on the site, the geometry of Melbourne, compromised by the fact that we want to keep all buildings intact. So the grid would have to bend to acknowledge, to nod its head in recognition of the existing building there. Dissolving the grid. Typologies which need to be implemented there, and then developing a vision which would be not something, this is a maximum, which would never be reached. It was about trying to find that ideal mix that long time ago Chris Alexander was advocating, which brings together urban design, urban planning, and urban management as a continuum, rather than finishing planning, handing it over to designer, finishing, handing it over to managers, and always washing hands after somebody else take over. So stocks and inheritances was very, very important part, and we were learning from Barcelona, which was at that time doing 22@ project, and also from 798 project in Beijing, which was in its opening also very, very interesting when Chinese government gave one old factory to artists to use. So that was one of the things that we wanted to do here. So after very, very detailed site analysis, and these amazing industrial, post-industrial buildings which have their own poetics, although that was a terrible site in terms of use, combining this, something that I called polis strategy started to invert. Why? Here is a high land. So like this with my campus, I started calling that polis. So we can have Acropolis, that was my joke. But then we discovered that besides Acropolis, we can have Agropolis, because this piece of land here is incredibly fertile. Then we can have Artpolis, following Chinese example, to give part of these buildings to artists to ignite it with their own artistic activities, and Aquapolis, because first thing that army did in the 19th century, they have done what all rivers unfortunately suffer in Tokyo. They have built a wall and they transformed building into canal. We decided to give back to nature what belongs to nature, and because that is Aboriginal sacred site. So basically giving that back to water meant giving it back to Aboriginal culture, but without denying 21st century. So to cut the long story short, it was art de vivre. It was about not lifestyle, because it is a kind of banal word. It is about style. It is, again, something that is packageable and sellable. It was about opening opportunity for this beautifully expressed concept in French. And finding various expressions. Art polis was to be a trigger. And it was about, again, following, this is project 798 in Beijing, and doing the same by inviting these artists who really adore with their graffiti the streets of Melbourne. I think Melbourne doesn't lag behind Barcelona in that sense. And just to help them open up. The condition was that once when they are allocated their warehouses, that they have a condition that they help start of agriculture there. So it is about cultivating minds and bodies through recreation and that. And the market on which artwork and the work locally produced agricultural goods would be sold together. My students were exploring various really creative typologies, how to liberate fertile land from construction, while at the same time not zoning, so that we can have kind of double and multiple use. But this was very, very important, to acknowledge this act of creativity, not to glorify this over this, but to understand their difference. And then these were various scenarios. When we had defense of this project in front of the team of future investors. I prepared, and this is that usual, and you know, some of you are in practice, preparation for discussion. On the other side was a banker, one of the chiefs of National Bank of Australia. So I was joking, I prepared like this, because, okay, after presentation, and it was fantastic. First question says, does anybody have questions? And he raises the hand, and I think, okay. But he says, you know, because our task was to try to find about 3,500 dwellings there. And he says, we did a market research based on your draft. And we can sell tomorrow 10,000 houses there. Can you make more? So suddenly my arch enemy was our friend. You know, I was totally unprepared for that situation. So expected fight with the banker failed. Australia really shows, educated people in Australia really show that what is seen as radical is not radical, that there is enough people who, as I was joking, want to tattoo on their foreheads, I live in Maribyrnong. Because living in Maribyrnong means sharing cars, means riding bicycles, meaning not having proverbial 2.5 cars, not having 500 square meters houses, which is Australian suburban ideal until recently. So that enabled us to go from maximum scenario to search what would be optimal scenarios. And then how to proceed, I was discussing with Sejima Kazuyo, with Kengo Kuma, to help us establish that benchmark of excellence to kick off with really good design. Of course, like any other project, it's a complex one. It is in the hands of there was change of government, but it is there. And West 8 from the Rotterdam, field operations from New York, and Grimshaw's from Sydney branch, are developing project further with association with Gale Architects who started all of that. So this is one of our projects at one spectrum. It's a big, urban, for us, huge, for a small laboratory, huge project which had its life. So I will show you also, and then I promise to stop, one very small project. That non-measurable quality just as a kind of interlude between two projects. In Eminem, this was one of my main points. Something that I strongly believe in and that I'm trying to communicate to my students without really imposing. I don't want to impose. I want to indoctrinate softly. So famous cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. That makes me human. But then it emphasizes our rational selves, and we add our emotional selves. As you see, there is an interest. I'm interested because it exists. I hate the idea that somebody is looking in my brain, but they are. So I know that they are. I'm interested in that. So it is about culturally induced split within what each of us is. So what about sentio ergo sum? What about I feel, therefore I am? So it is about comprehension which is not reduced to understanding. And then amo ergo sum. I love, therefore I am. And that is something that is that red color in the plus there. So I love, therefore I am. And a few years ago, I was a member of the Philips think tank for healthy and livable cities. And I pushed this kind of tongue-in-cheek question here, which Philips, being Dutch, very, very nice and accurate, they have put here somewhere, like my copyright, as I have invented the lovable. But it was a serious gameplay. It was from livable to lovable, because livable, as I said, is something that is sellable, but something that is about love is something that is impossible except sharing at very, very personal level. The tragedy was that their illustration for lovable was totally opposite from what I could ever imagine. But it resonated nicely with that book that Bertrando mentioned from a long time ago, which my alma mater published, which was about urbophilia, love for cities. I always joke with students, it's better than necrophilia, better than pedophilia, proudly urbophilia. So measure that. That was my challenge to these colleagues in measuring the non-measurable. Can you measure that? And helpfully for us, brain science shows that emotions are ensuring our survival. Emotions are before thought gets formed, before feeling gets formulated. So emotions are central to cognition. So what we are trying to do is that deliberate overlap between scientific, pseudoscientific, and prescribed exclusion into subjectivity, seeking methodology of complexity, the complexity of which corresponds to the complexity of the phenomena explored. Of course, it is, as Roland Barthes said at the beginning, it's a fantasy. But we have to fantasize. Doesn't that also make us human? I believe that it does, our ability to imagine. As Sandra Mitchell puts beautifully, she comes from the background in life sciences. She says, world is indeed complex, so too should be the representations analysis of it. Yet science has traditionally sought to reduce the booming, buzzing confusion to simple, universal, and timeless underlying laws, to explain what there is and how it behaves. And the title of her book, which I really recommend, is The Unsimple Truth, because if she says that what we are taught is truth, we have to unsimplify it. It was simplified artificially for us. Out there, it's not like that. So second design research project is one that I'm very proud of, and some of you know it. That rich tradition of student competitions in Japan culminated by Lixil Foundation, which is really an interesting organization which organizes student competitions, where since 2010, I think, the winner is built. So imagine a student competition where the winning scheme is built. So I was invited to be a member of the jury, and next year we were invited, my laboratory was invited to take part. So because I was a member of the jury, following year I was not a member of the jury, but I had that honor to be invited among 10 universities from all over the world. So 3 shortlisted, this was a competition outline, the Next Generation Sustainable House, which was for 2 researchers for short visit to come to explore hard, harsh, cold climate of Hokkaido. And you see here, it was really illustrious competition. It was Tsinghua University, which is fantastic, China Academy of Art, where Wang Shu teaches, Columbia University, MIT, AA from London, Aalto University, TU Munich, Politecnico di Milano, ETH, Oslo, Keio University, and Tohoku University. Shortlisted were Aalto, Keio, and ETH Zurich. And we were the lucky winners. And I was very glad, because when we started discussing about this project, there were 2 very important things for me. And this comes back to that what this teaching at co+labo is about. It had to be student competition. I don't compete there. I support my students to be themselves. And it was a very good team. But when we started, I told them, imagine if we were shortlisted, not maybe in these words, with Helsinki and Zurich. I mean, those guys know what is cold. You in Tokyo have no idea what is cold. You visit Hokkaido. So, of course, we know how to make, and that was one of my early specializations, bioclimatic design, climate and architecture. We will do it. I think everybody will do it. These 10 are excellent schools. Today, who is not doing climatically responsible design is just irresponsible. So let's believe that all are going to be excellent at that field. But what else? What is going to win this competition? And these are my winners, by the way. So, bioclimatic, this sun, like in Le Corbusier's drawings, which was made for another purpose. But this is exactly, the winter sun and the summer sun, smiling and being Medusa there. So when you are flying to Hokkaido, you see this amazing flat, fertile agricultural landscape. And in this particular place, Taikicho, there is this crazy building, which is huge circular building. And I have never seen something like that in my life before. It turns out that that is a building for training of horses, racing horses in winter. Because everything gets so cold, and they had fantastic horses, so the training has to continue in winter. But there are no horses. You cannot see a horse there. So my point was that these beautiful creatures have disappeared because of our ways of development. Everybody drives Toyota. Nobody rides horses anymore, more of course. So, of course, architecture is about climate. Of course, architecture is about technology. But of course, architecture is also about memory. So can our building help remember, and not just remember, but maybe do something more about our horses? And I was in Hong Kong at that time. I took this photo, this commercial of, Longines commercial about this guy hugging horse. So maybe he is into some kind of, how would that be called? It's not horsophilia, but it was that idea. Can we have that kind of, this sort of thing? Can we think about building which would be celebrating something more than just climate? Climate, of course. And then the building was conceived as 2 interlocking spaces, in which 2 horses and 2 researchers would coexist. So horses and their body temperature and compost, to put it politely, can heat the building. And also researchers, and that was, to me, the most important point, and that was really my input into this. Everything was student work. It was a slap in the face that I am an urban animal. I have no idea how does it sound when horses wake up in the morning, but it sounds somehow. So the idea was that researchers get woken up each morning by horses getting up, like a nature waking up and slapping your face and say, do your research about this environment. So, and from each space which people inhabit, horses should be visible so that people can see horses, but horses significantly can also see people all the time. So, interestingly, one of my students, Shinohara-san, discovered that charcoal, which was necessary to absorb urine and all that, actually melts the snow, and it can be used as pavement, and it fertilizes the land, and then later it can be used for cooking and freezing. So the facades were meant to be, southern facade was meant to be in winter with charcoal, which would gradually be disappearing over the winter. And then research has shown that actually we don't need two horses, that only one is enough. And because of the smells, because of necessary insulation, we were very glad to hear that actually we don't need body temperature of the horses because compost is enough. That was really how, that is that radical realism. You need to know something to make decisions. You don't dismiss being heated by compost before you think about it. And this is a particular program. So for this particular program, this is sufficient. We tend to think about efficiency only, but what about sufficiency? So my students are now going regularly to mix. That this is about sensuality. This is about all senses engagement. This is about bringing smell. Aki-san, I think you have enjoyed this. So you may be in some of these photos. But it was really about trying to create this, and this is our happy resident there. Unfortunately, he doesn't live there all the time, but when I was there 2 years ago, suddenly I thought they have washed the horses because suddenly they were very small, but they discovered that rather than having one big horse, they have two ponies. So now it is about two ponies. And this is the space, and charcoal has been moved for financial reasons inside, but the thing is that building is not finished. I'm trying, and this is one of mixed successes. It really doesn't work as much as I would like it to work. That each year there is a competition in the laboratory. There was one when Enrico and Nicolo were there. Trying to make current students to think how can this building be upgraded, and we are trying to ask our clients, owners, if that can be done, but each year they spend money on the new building. And so this is how our house lives very close to a very elegant house designed by Kuma's office. Very elegant building, but it was fantastic when my student who was in charge of this project, Komatsu-san, who now works in Kuma's office, who has basically earned his job by showing very interesting excellence here. He was explaining to me, he was looking at a model when they were designing. And I'm asking, what are you doing? And he was very much in favor of this very, very strange roof of the building. He says, I'm trying to make our roof lower than Kuma-san's. That is that respect for the teacher, So students' building has to be a little bit lower than that of Kuma-sensei. And now this, energy, and I like to show this to our students. Well, Japan knows what is this. Japan also knows what is Fukushima. Isn't it time to think about radically different ways of gaining energy? So thank you very much for your resilience. I will stop here because if I continue, this will be really like Fidel Castro, and we will have to ask for breakfast. Arigatou gozaimasu.